Good afternoon, everyone. And in some cases, it may be early evening or morning, depending on wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us. This is our webinar for families and parents to update you on the fall 2020 plan. We're appreciative that you've made the time. I know that you've had a lot of questions along the way, and it's really important for us to make sure that we're making time to answer as many of your questions as possible. And so we appreciate you making time today. I'm Fanta, and I'm the Vice President for Campus Life and Inclusive Excellence here at American University. And I'm joined by several of my colleagues. We have Jessica Waters, who is with the Academic Affairs Office with us this afternoon. Shirleyne McDonald, who is with the Office of Financial Aid. Jonnel Clothier, who's with our AU Office of AU Central office, who will be able to answer some of your questions. But before we jump into your questions, wanted to make sure that you have the opportunity to hear from President Burwell. President Burwell was able to move some things around and to join us this afternoon to be able to share a little bit more context for the decision that we've had to make. And so I thought we would have her get started by providing us with a little bit more information about that. So once again, thanks to everyone.
Fanta, thank you very much. And also want to thank all of you all for joining us today. Want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank you for your patience and your support during this time. We know this is a challenging time for everyone, and we really do appreciate that patience and support. As a parent of two, we had found out about what our son's schooling was going to be. They're 10 and 12. And we found out our sons, and late last night we found out about our daughter. Both our children will be online for the fall. But we do know, and I personally understand what it's like in terms of trying to make sure that you're doing everything you can for your children and what this uncertainty does. So thank you so much for your patience with us and your support and joining us today so that we can hear your questions and work as hard as we can to make sure that we're getting you the answers that you and your students need. I wanted to spend just a few minutes of time to talk about our decision. And the first thing I wanted to talk about are the principles that we've used throughout this period of COVID-19 to guide our decision making. And these principles were clear and at the first and initial decisions back in March are what guided us. And the first principle is the health and safety of the American University community. That's our students, first and foremost, who are the majority of our community. It's our staff, it's our faculty, and the folks that surround us here at AU, but that health and safety issue of our students is front and center in any decision that we are making. The second principle that guides us is the principle of how do we maximize on our core mission. And that is educating your sons and daughters in the broadest sense of that. And it's our scholarship and research, which we continue to do. And we wanted to set out that goal and that principle that in whatever context there is, how do we maximize on the AU promise and education that we offer our students? The third principle was, what's our role in the broader community in terms of the health and safety, the broader community that we're in, and that also includes the economic issues and how we impact those issues as well. And so those are principles that have guided us throughout. I think you know we made the decision and put together AU Forward. There are a number of people on this call who pulled many all-nighters to get us to the place where we could figure out how we thought at that point in time we could safely bring what was going to be about 45% of our resident students back to campus, and those would be our first years, and a plan for blended learning. And we like to call it blended because it was blended and offered opportunity for choice for our parents and our students with face-to-face and online. As things progressed during the summer, and really, I think after the post-July 4th period, we started to see some things that caused us to have to reevaluate and make a different decision. And I want to just spend a moment on the four major things. There are many other pieces to this, as you all know, and I'm sure in your daily lives, there are different pieces that are contributing to decisions that you're making professionally or personally. But there are four main things, and we outlined these in the announcement, but I think it bears repeating. The first is the caseload. And we saw those cases go up to 72,000. We're in the high 40s now in terms of the nation and the cases. And that caseload at those levels indicates broad community spread. And that community spread creates a situation where one's ability to contain the virus, and I think some of you may know in terms of my old life, when I was Secretary of Health and Human Services and spent time on these issues, whether it was Ebola or Zika or other public health issues, this question of community spread and one's ability to contain. And that happens because you can't know, you don't contact trace as much, and you're not able to know exactly where you stand, where the cases are coming from, so that you can best contain it. And so at these levels, that's a problem, and a problem for a university that's bringing students from everywhere in the country. And I spent a lot of time talking to epidemiologists and others to really try and understand what that trajectory of that caseload would be over the next months. And that was a big contributor to the decision. The second element that was a large contributor is actually testing. And it has to do with two parts to the testing issue. One is actual access to the tests and the types of tests and the accuracy of the tests. And the other is the timetable for results of the tests. When those two things become difficult and constrained, one's ability to contain and manage outbreaks becomes much more limited. In a world where students might have to wait 7 days for a test result, that's not going to help us really contain on our campus. And we knew that, and that was a very, very big challenge. Third issue that came about during this time period, and it was an evolution in terms of people have asked me, what's that moment when you knew this was the decision? And I have to say it was an evolution and 3 weeks of sleepless nights, as I'm an optimist, and I kept hoping those cases would, you could start to see a dramatic drop if people took quick action. Within a 14-day period, you could start to see that, and we weren't seeing it. What we were seeing was changes. But during that same period, another thing happened, and that was the schools in the region closed in terms of the elementary and secondary schools, which of course affects our faculty and our staff. And then one of the last things that happened right before the decision is the District of Columbia put in place a 14-day quarantine for anyone returning from, right now the list is 27 states. That list gets updated every 2 weeks. But the idea that we would be bringing many of your students, your sons and daughters here, and the first thing that would happen, it would be for 14 days, they would be in a room alone, their first time separated and starting their collegiate experience in that way. And with that as just, something new added, another issue. And so those issues led us to re-examine our decision. We are disappointed. I know, many of you and your students are disappointed. We had hoped, we'd worked very hard to put together a plan that had the health and safety as a top priority, and then how we can best execute against our core mission. But we needed to re-examine that and make different decisions. We are disappointed, but now we are in a space, and that's why we're having these conversations, is to make sure that we move forward in ensuring that that principle number 2, that we are working to deliver that high quality education. That is why you and your student have selected to come to American University. And that's in everything for what we're going to do in the classrooms and the offerings that we have beyond the classroom. Even in our summer program, our Institute of Women in Politics this summer, even for the summer program, had Nikki Haley, Joni Ernst, Jennifer Palmieri, as we're trying to make sure that your students are having access to the things that they wanted to come to American University for. So I'm going to close where I began, which is with thanks and appreciation. We are excited that you and your family are a part of this Eagle family and this community, and that we are a community going through was a challenging time as a nation and the world. But I think as we do it, we are trying to do it step by step together with our core mission front and center and our community front and center. So thank you, as I said before, for both your patience and support.
Thank you, President Burwell. While we have you here for another minute, before you move on to your next appointment, I know one of the questions that's come up as we were gearing up for the webinar has been around some of the economics of this, both as we look at what's happening in terms of the economic situation nationally, but also the question has come up as to what is American University doing specifically around cost containment in this environment?
So back in March, when we made the initial decisions, the first step that we took actually was to cut the pay of myself and the cabinet. That was followed by a series of other decisions to manage our finances. I think you all know, in any we have our faculty, all of our functions, we need to keep going. And in many ways, we've added to some of the technology. We're supporting our students. We brought back students that were studying abroad, which was, was quite an event and a feat and a costly thing. But there were many elements that have led to difficulties on the revenue and expense side for the university. But we took steps to cut pay for our senior team. We then stopped any new capital construction. We froze pay, so there were no merit or any type of increases for this fiscal year, which started July 1st, for anyone at the university who is above $40,000. We did protect those who were under $40,000 in terms of trying to make sure during these difficult times that people could get through. We have done a number of steps that we've never done with regard to our endowment and how we take from any parts of earnings or other parts of the endowment. And we've also used reserves that we have put away for this period of time if there was something that we faced in terms of our student enrollment. So we're using a number of tools. We have a number of things that are we've talked about that we may need to do. We may need to do a furlough of 5 days when we get to the new year, and that will depend on our enrollment numbers as they come in. And likely we will need to do that because, as you all may know, one thing we did do is we increased our financial aid by $13 million as we saw more appeals coming in from students and families who've had changed circumstances. And so Shirleyne and the team, we wanted to give them an ability to try our best to meet some of the needs of the community those needs that were new and were coming in. In addition, I think our AU Community Cares fall discount of 10% is another thing that we will need to, we're making plans to figure out how we can financially cover that. So right now, how I like to say we are in a prudent but not panicked situation. These are difficult times for universities, and there are no two ways about that. And I think you read that and you understand that because we are tuition-driven institutions. And our expenses don't change, but many of our revenues change. We didn't have any conference revenue this summer. I'm sure you can imagine. We use this university's facilities all summer, and we do that throughout the year in terms of whether that's Bender Arena and the sports events that we're able to hold and rent out, all the summer camps, all of those kinds of things we were not able to do this summer. And so that also impacts our revenue. But I feel confident about the finances of the university. There was an article that was written about universities and put them in quadrants, and I will just say nothing about others, but just be happy that we were in a thrive quadrant, even though these are difficult times. So appreciate the question. It is something I'm sure you can imagine is on my mind every day in terms of one of the things that I am deeply focused on in terms of the finances of the institution and how do we deliver that quality engagement of our faculty, having our high quality faculty engage with our students and the other elements of American university education. So glad you asked about that, because that and the delivering on the AU mission are the two things that are front and center for me every day.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for making time. I appreciate that. I know for our families, again, on the call, there's lots of questions that you have, and so we're going to jump right in. To follow up on President Burwell comment, particularly around some of the decision and especially the health and safety. I know, and I've been hearing from some of you that some families have given some thought to maybe having their first year students still come to Washington for the fall and to have kind of that experience in Washington. And as someone who's been working with students for close to 30 years, I will have to first start by saying that really would urge our families to rethink that. I think this is one of those moments where we're still very much in the middle of a pandemic, and where the reason why we've made the decision that we've had for this fall is really around health and safety, and to see first year students who would be coming far from home, who are not familiar with this city, unlike some of our upper class students, and to maybe find themselves at a hotel and so forth is something that I would really urge you all to guard against. I know this is something that certainly would be of concern to all of us. And so I wanted to preface that by saying that I know there's been some conversations, and I understand we are very, very disappointed. As I often say, one of the joy of our work is to be able to be in an environment with our students, and would have loved to be able to all be on campus at this time and to also be able to kind of reconnect with our colleagues. But this is one of those moments where I think we all have to kind of keep that in mind. So I just wanted to start off with that because I know there's been some conversations from folks about that. With that said, I want to jump into some of our topics. I know one of the things that's been also on the mind of many of you is, here we're going to be online. What does this mean for community? What does this mean for how people stay connected? And how do we build that kind of AU community and spirit from near and far? A very, very legitimate question to ask. And we've been giving this a lot of thought. And we see this in multiple ways. One is we need to unleash what I call the creativity of our students and our community to reimagine what may community look like within sort of this virtual space. And so we have our students and others who are giving this a lot of thought through our clubs and organizations. That's one of the ways. But the other ways that we're also looking at how we might be able to really create a sense of community is to look at having people come together in different cities. We know that there are critical masses in some of the cities across this country, and in some cases, maybe even outside of the US. So we want to make sure that we really connect with you on how we can foster community by doing so. You've asked, will there be virtual kickoffs? Yes, we'll be looking at some virtual kickoffs, and different one of them, would our clubs and organizations be very much, vibrant this fall? Yes, our clubs and organizations and student organizations are gearing up for a fall of activities and so forth. And then you have asked, can AU help us with other Eagles meeting in our neighborhoods? This is where this idea of AU in the cities will be coming from. So stay tuned. We'll be able to provide more information about the ways in which those connections can happen. And not only among our students, but with our students and our alumni, with our students and families who may be in those respective areas. So we will be doing everything we can to build community. That's one of the things I wanted to mention. I also know that we have some international families who were able to join us today. We're glad that you've been able to join us from different parts of the world. Our community is enriched by the presence of international students. And we know that you've been getting a lot of information around some of the immigration regulations. And for those families, just wanted to let you know that through our International Student Scholar Services, we will continue to do webinars for returning students and new students. And all students will be able to take classes online as international students. And our international students have been getting invitations to attend webinars along with their families through our International Student Scholar Services. Karyn, if you don't mind going to the next. And then there's been some questions about what services will be available on campus. For those who may be in the DMV area, rest assured that our Student Health Center will remain open with extended hours of operation. Our vendor library services will be online. There'll be limited library spaces that will be made available to those who may be in the DMV area, meaning the District, Maryland, and Virginia area. And they'll be able to access those spaces by making reservations. Our fitness centers definitely will be closed. That's one of the areas that will be closed. There will be a shuttle service operation. It'll be on a modified schedule, and that schedule will be made available. And then we will be making spaces, study spaces for students who are in the area, because we know that some of them will want to utilize those spaces. And that's one of the other reasons why we feel so compelled that it's important for us to build community in other parts of the country, so that there may be, depending on what the situation is in your respective part, that students maybe periodically can meet at a cafe with others, that there may be some virtual times that could be created so that they could find other students who are within their regions and their areas. So we'll make sure we make that available to you. But those are some of the campus services that will be made available. And my colleague Jessica will talk about some of the other services around support services, of course, to really help support our students with their academic work. And so I'll pass it on to Jessica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Waters. I'm the Dean of Undergraduate Education and Vice Provost for Academic Student Services. Thank you so much for joining us today. Also wanted to note that I am a double eagle. I am not a triple eagle like Dr. Oth is, but I earned both my undergraduate degree and my law degree from AU and have been on the faculty full-time since 2008. So the commitment and the depth of my involvement with AU runs deep. And please know that we consider all of you and your students our families too, right? When we think about the decisions we're making and we're thinking about how will we support your students, we think of it as our family. And I just want to say, you know, a shout out to all the families and parents who are making this work. I've got 2 kids of my own, working full time, doing the online thing with my kids. I get it. We're in it with you, and you all are doing a wonderful job. So if no one has said that to you today, you're doing a wonderful job. Thank you for supporting your students. I'll jump into some of the ways that we are going to support your students while they are here at AU. And I'll talk about 3 big areas and get into some of the weeds on the questions that I know people are really curious about. The 3 big areas I'll talk about are classes, what are classes going to look like, what does academic support look like, and then how do we think about engagement and the classroom experience and forming community. So those are our 3 big areas. First, when we think about the classes, as President Burwell noted, our classes will be almost entirely online. There are 2 main types of online classes. They're called synchronous and asynchronous, and we throw around those terms, and I think it's important that we define them. When we say synchronous, that means the class and the faculty member meet at the same time at certain times. So for example, if your class is meeting at 4 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesdays, students and the professor would be in the classroom virtually at 4 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesdays. An asynchronous class does not have those same set in-person online class meetings. What it has is set assignments and set deadlines, but there is not an expectation that a student would be online at a certain time. So we have synchronous, which is like real time, same time, asynchronous, not real time, not same time. A lot of people had said, hey, what about this time zone thing, right? What if I am on the West Coast and obviously AU is on the East Coast? And I think that's an individualized determination for our students about what will work for them. Our classes will be held in the Eastern time zone. So if we say 4 p.m., that means 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you are, for example, in California, what should your student do? And I would say a couple of things. 1, look at each individual class and see what the meeting times are. So for example, if a class was meeting at noon on a Tuesday, it's probably entirely possible for a student 3 or 4 hours different time zones to join that class. If a class was meeting at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, your student really needs to think through, am I the type of person who will get up at 5 a.m. and join this class? For some unicorn students, that may be true, right? For others, that's going to be really, really tough. So I would encourage each of those students to work with their academic advisors to go through each class. Each class is posted on the schedule of classes with the times and says whether the class is synchronous or asynchronous, and an advisor can help a student figure out, are there other sections, for example, of a class that meets at a different time that may be more conducive for my schedule. So really encourage your student to work with their academic advisor. They can reach their advisors through email or by setting up virtual appointments. All of our advisors across campus are responding to email, phone, and available for virtual appointments. So please do look at each schedule individually and make the decisions that are best for your student. Importantly, if we have students who are set to graduate in December or set to graduate next May, and they need a certain class that is only offered at a synchronous time that wouldn't work for them. So say, for example, the class is offered at 3 in the afternoon, and because of your time zone, it would be 3 in the morning for your student. Please contact your academic advisor so we can figure out a workaround there. So for any student who is set to graduate, we are committed to making sure you can timely complete your academic program, graduate on time. So all of these questions are really individualized. Please work with your academic advisor. So on the question of classes, class times are set. They're on the schedule of classes. I think in a sort of different line of questioning, a lot of folks have said like, okay, this has all been really hard. These transitions are difficult. What's the silver lining, right? What is going to be good about the fall? What are you excited about? And I can honestly say, as someone who works very closely with both our faculty and students day in, day out, I'm excited for the fall. It's going to look different, to be sure. It's not the in-person classroom experience that so many of us are used to, but I'm also fully confident that our faculty have been working tirelessly since last March to create and craft and tweak classes so that the expert content and the high level of pedagogy that we expect from our faculty is present in those online classes. And I think the silver lining in this is these types of times unleash creativity, and we have seen that in our faculty time and time again. I was speaking with some of our science faculty earlier this week, and they are doing things like in our chemistry of cooking class, trying to figure out how can students do these labs at home on their own stoves or their parents' stoves. In our astronomy class, they're doing star charts. In our physics class, they're mailing kits to students so they can do experiments at home. In other classes, we're figuring out how do students get high quality but affordable microscopes, 20 bucks, to do these experiments at home so that those lab things continue. In our art classes, we've invested in the technology so that our art instructors can synchronously be doing a critique of a student's artwork as they're working at home. In our political science classes, this is a place where there's a true silver lining. If we think about the types of speakers that we know our students want to hear from, they want to talk to members of Congress, they want to talk to Supreme Court justices. And you can imagine that scheduling those things in person can take some time, right? To get on Ruth Bader Ginsburg's schedule, you need to do that 6 months in advance. But it's a whole different thing if you need someone to Zoom into a class for 15 minutes. And what we have heard from our local luminaries and national luminaries is that they're really willing to do that, right? Folks are really interested in, can I engage with a college class at AU through a Zoom and commit to a half hour to spend time with students? And they're really willing to do that. Importantly, our alumni network, including the folks on this call, runs deep in DC and around the world. Earlier this week, I was on an exchange with about 80 of our alums who are local. And we reached out to them and said, hey, interested in being involved this fall? And they're all writing back and saying, yes, can I give a guest lecture? Can I Zoom in? Can I join a book club? Can I help a student get a virtual internship? So when we talk about doing this unleashing of creativity and the silver lining, we're really seeing that. So when we talk about our classes, what they're going to look like, we've talked about the online setting, we've talked about synchronous, we've talked about thinking about schedule, we've talked about my third question, I skipped one, on the question of engagement and how students will have the unparalleled experience we expect at AU. Karyn, if you can move to the next slide. And the second question that I signaled was the question of services, right? And the question of academic support. We have these top-notch, high-quality classes, but we also recognize that it is a transition for all of our students as it was for us. And we want to make sure that our academic support is there to back up your student. I think an important thing as you're talking to your students is to remind them that college has always been a time of transition, right? It's always been a time where you have learned your resilience and you've learned how to thrive and succeed and fly, and you have learned how to pick yourself up with the support of the AU community when needed. All of those supports are still here at AU. Dr. Ah talked about things like the counseling center, and she's going to talk about the health center and other services later. I've talked a bit about the academic advisors, but please know that all of our support services are in place and prepared to operate at 100% virtually. So our writing center is prepared to operate at 100% virtually. Our academic coaching, 100%. Our quantitative lab, our tutoring services, all ready to go. Importantly, the lessons from March and over the summer and offering online classes have enabled us to really tailor a lot of what we're doing for online learning. Next week, we're having a university-wide online learner success summit so that all of our faculty and staff are prepared to offer that to students. We're putting together online learning orientations for all of our students, and importantly, embedding it in classes, particularly our first-year classes. So for our entering students, they all take a class that we call the American University Experience. It's a transitions to college class. We spent the summer redesigning it to make sure that the first couple of weeks really focus on how do I build the academic skills to succeed in an online learning setting. And importantly, how do I build the social skills, right? How do I find people online? How do I find that community? How do I take care of myself and my own mental health? And how can I be a productive member of the community? All of that is built into the classes very deliberately and in response to what we're dealing with worldwide. So service is completely available to back up what we're doing in the classroom. I spoke a bit about this idea of internships and experiential education. We're working on internships in a couple of ways. One, so many employers, as you know, are online at this point. So they are, the work world has changed dramatically in the past 6 months. And employers are recognizing that internships need to change dramatically as well. So many of our local employers and employers nationwide have signaled we're really willing to help figure out how to do virtual internships, because that's how all of our employees are working, right? So we need to train students to work in that setting as well. So that's one way. We're also, for the students returning to DC, and I know this is particularly acute for our juniors and seniors and folks who are looking to enter into the workforce. Many of our local employers have signaled they are going to have some form of in-person internship. One of the things that we are doing is making sure with each of those employers, asking them to certify the health and safety guidelines that they are following, so we can feel assured that your students are going into safe settings. That will be an option available for students as well. So when we think about internships, a couple of ways to do that. And then the experiential education, again, this is a question of unleashing creativity. I was talking to one of our faculty members this morning who teaches literature. And one of the things he is doing with his class is all of the national awards. We're talking like the Booker Prize or the Penn Faulkner Prizes. He's having students evaluate works of literature before the selection committees do, figure out how they would select the books that should win the prizes this year. And then they're going to see at the end of the semester whether they match the actual prize winners, right? So engaging in this like really interesting process that allows that type of thinking that we need our students to engage in. In other classes, like our community-based research scholars classes, they're typically out in the community doing community service work and partnering with local organizations. This year, they've committed to tutoring DC public school students, so doing online tutoring and making sure that students across DC, particularly those in some of the lower income districts, have the support they need to succeed academically. So those opportunities remain robust. Karyn, could you move? Yeah, thanks. Internet, obviously, this is something at the top of everyone's mind. How can I make sure that my student has reliable computer and internet access? And we're really aware that this is an acute need for many of our students. We have set up a special task force to make sure that if there is any student who is struggling with access, they can get help, and we can provide individualized help. There's actual people at the other end of this email, the Tech Force at AU, Tech Task Force at AU, and they will help troubleshoot with any student who needs it. And then this question of the academic calendar. I've talked a lot about the things that have changed, and we're all dealing with those changes, but an important piece of what we are committed to doing and what we are doing with our students and families is making sure that we can hold as many things as constant as possible. It is critically important that people, that our families and our students be able to make informed decisions and have certainty about the academic calendar and different deadlines. So, for example, our first day of classes remains the same. Our last day of classes remains the same, and these are all posted on our academic calendar. Final exam period remains the same, so students can prepare and know when their final exams will be. Things like our add drop period, so students can add a class within the first 10 days of class or drop a class within the first 10 days of class. That remains the same. We're holding it constant so that students have certainty. Likewise with our grade policies, like electing to take a class on an A through F scale or a pass-fail scale. Those deadlines are all set out in the schedule of classes, and we plan to adhere to them again to give that constant certainty about what students can expect over the course of the semester. I also signaled in the beginning of the call that we are endeavoring to hold every class as steady as possible. So not changing class times and making sure that students can rely on the schedule they've put in place. And then finally, the question of if your student is thinking, hey, I don't know if this is right for me. I don't know if I want to join a university community in the fall if it is a largely online experience. First I would say, please make sure that before a decision like this is made, before a student thinks about deferring admission or taking a temporary leave, that you've reached out to an academic advisor, that you've reached out to your financial aid advisors. There are a lot of things that seem daunting, right? Students can get overwhelmed by, what does this mean for my financial aid? What does this mean for what my classes will look like? And it's really easy to stay in that stuck place. But with the help of an expert academic advisor or an expert financial aid advisor in Shirleyne's office, we can help talk your student through all those considerations and help figure out whether a deferral or a temporary leave is the right choice for a student. I think there's a couple of things to think about in addition to making sure students are making informed decisions. The question and the really important value of sticking to the academic plan and making sure that our students can timely graduate. Right? A student who takes a semester off or a year off, it changes the academic course and the academic progress. So we want to make sure that all of our students can stay on the right academic path. Of course, we recognize that for some students, deferring or taking the leave may be the right option. To do so, they should work with their academic advisor. A student who is an entering first year would defer admission. A student who is a returning student could talk to their advisor about a temporary leave. I think that's it for me, and I'll turn it over to Shirleyne.
Yeah. So
welcome everyone.
Yes, please go ahead, Shirleyne. And then I want Jonnel. It's first about billing. We'll have Jonnel talk about billing first.
Let's do that.
Because there's a lot of questions around billing. So Jonnel.
Okay, let me go ahead and answer those questions for you first, and then I will hand it off to my colleague Shirleyne. So thank you, everybody. So by now, we hope that you have signed into your students' account activity at Eagle Service. They should have given you proxy access to do that. If they haven't, you certainly can have them go on to Eagle Service, type in proxy access, and that will give you access to your students' account activity, not just the function to pay the bill. So this gives you an opportunity to see the charges and payments that have been associated with the student's bill. So by now you should have seen that your student's tuition has been discounted by 10%. If they had a housing or a meal plan, those fees have been taken off your student's bill. The sports center fee has also been waived, and the student activity fee has been reduced. We still have a few graduate programs that are sort of non-traditional programs where the fees are still being worked out. They should hit by the end of the week. So if you are one of those students or your student is one of those students, that will be finalized by Friday. But all of our undergraduates and our graduate students and our law school students, their tuition has been adjusted by the 10% discount. Now, when you're looking at what else is on the bill, you'll probably see two other things that are possibly still on your bill. One of them is the UPass fee, which our students, it's a mandatory fee that gives our students in the DMV, District, Maryland, Virginia area access to the subway, metro cars, and buses. If your student is not in the area and they won't be utilizing our public transportation, your student will be able to file a waiver. It's going to be forthcoming very soon. The deadline is September 21st to file that waiver, which is the same day as the end of ad drop. And it will be available on the parking and transportation website. And I presume it will also be in the FAQs that are on our main homepage. So we want to keep an eye out for the UPass waiver. The health insurance waiver is out there as well for students that are covered by other plans through either their family or other means. And that has already been charged to our students' accounts. And our students can submit a waiver application to have that removed if they do not need AU's health insurance and they have other health insurance. The deadline for that is September 18th. So we want you to be mindful of those two big dates to make sure if you are not going to need either of those two things that you go ahead and waive them. The next thing I want to talk about is just going back to this. So if you're looking at your bill, you have any questions, AU Central works really collaboratively with our colleagues in housing and dining and parking and financial aid. So if you're not sure where to go, start with us and we will help get you to the right person. So that's always a good place to start, aucentral@american.edu. So for our families now that are curious about, all right, I've already paid everything and these adjustments have now left a credit balance on my account. What's going to happen? So our Office of Student Accounts will start running refunds. They're actually starting to do them tomorrow. It doesn't mean you're going to see that in your bank account tomorrow. It usually takes a couple business days, but they're going to start running them with an anticipation that the first ones will start heading out of here on Friday. What that means for you is if you have not signed up for ACH direct deposit, you may want to have your student follow the link that's on the slide that you can see on your screen, or you can go in if you have proxy access and make sure that you have the right bank account information. It's the fastest way to get your refund. For those students that haven't signed up, we will send a paper check, and of course that's going to take longer to A, process, and B, get to you. So if you're not signing up for ACH, you want to make sure that you have a good, accurate home address on file in the student's account. Now, coincidentally, tonight we will be putting a portal notification on your student's account. So when they log in tomorrow, they actually will have to verify their in-session and permanent address. So they'll see that tomorrow anyway, but it's just a good check to make sure that we have a good address. For our students that have utilized, and our families that have utilized 529 prepayment plans, so every check that we've received as of last Friday is pending posting on the student's account. So if you receive a refund and it's associated with 529 funds, you're going to want to go back to your 529 plan and ask them, what should we do with these return funds? We can't hold them and post them for spring. We're obligated to give you the money back, but you need to work with your 529 plan to see what they would like you to do with them. If you have a sense that your 529 check was sent on Monday, send us an email at AU Central, and we may be able to try to help find that check for you and try to work with you individually. No guarantees, but we'll absolutely do our best. The final thing I wanted to mention is for our international students, if you're expecting a refund and you've paid via wire transfer, we do have an opportunity to wire your refund to you. So if you are interested in that, please email aucentral@american.edu and we will help facilitate the wire transfer of your refund. And I believe that is all of the information that I need to share with you. And now I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Shirleyne, who will talk to you about the financial aid piece.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I know that there are probably so many questions surrounding this whole process and how it impacts your financial aid. So I'm just going to begin by saying we understand and we're here. I have a team of counselors who are doing their very best to try to answer the questions that you have. I do encourage you to please reach out. There are a couple ways that you can reach our office. The very first is, of course, sending an email. We've actually leveraged technology so that when you're sending an email to financialaid@american.edu, you're actually sending it to your assigned or designated counselor so that it will recognize the student and ensure that the correspondence that you're sending is funneled to your counselor. We are doing our level best to try to ensure that we're responding within a day to 2 days, just letting our families know, here's where you stand, here are the answers to the questions that you're submitting to us. So that's one way. But if you'd rather speak to someone, you'd like to have a conversation, we encourage you to do so as well. Our counselors are available Monday through Friday Eastern time from 9 to 5 to answer your questions. And if you're wondering who that person is, who your counselor is, we have the website listed on the slide at the very bottom. Once you go to the site, just simply indicate your student's first initial of last name, and the telephone number of their financial aid counselor will actually appear along with the name of the individual. So please reach out to us if you have any questions that I haven't been able to address for you during this webinar. So, but today I'm really going to try to answer like 2 to 3 of the most commonly asked questions of our office right now, given the change. I guess the very first is to address a misconception that most students and families have, and that's, oh goodness, we are now, all remote or distance learning. That means that it impacts my financial aid. Not necessarily. The modality in which we are providing instruction does not actually impact financial aid eligibility. And so for most students, you will not see any change at all. What I will say, though, is that a lot of students and families are concerned about, well, I intended on living on campus and now I'm not. What does that mean? And so let me address that directly and say, even though you're not living on campus, we anticipate that you're going to incur living costs. So that means you're still going to have costs for books. You're still going to have costs for food and for living. And so the aid that we've provided you wasn't only to help assist in covering your tuition and fees, but very much to cover the other components, of what we consider the cost of attendance, which does include living and food and transportation. And so the aid that you've received is given to you in order to cover those costs. Now, if our students and families reach out to us and say, I'm living at home as a commuter with my parents or with my family, then we will change the cost of attendance to reflect that the student is living at home with parent, with family, and use a commuter budget. That means that we will assume that the living costs, the component of paying for housing, for instance, that family will not incur that cost, and we will reduce the financial aid accordingly. But that's only if our students reach out to us and tell us very specifically, here are my living circumstances for the fall. Otherwise, we're going to assume that your intent of living in a different housing or is what you're continuing to do. We're not making any changes to students and families' financial aid unless you specifically notify our office and indicate that you will be living at home with family as a commuter. So that's the very first piece. The next piece is, yes, all of our students across the board were given a 10% tuition discount. For most students, there will be no change to the financial aid that you've received because of that discount. However, there are just really a couple exceptions to think of. The very first is that for our students who've received a combination of aid, either need-based aid or a merit scholarship from American University, if that aid was tuition restricted, meaning that it can only apply toward tuition costs, and it was received for the initial tuition amount, then we would have had to have reduced it to the current tuition that's being assessed for the fall. Keep in mind that this is only for the fall. Should things go back to the normal tuition fee schedule in the spring, then those funds will be issued to cover the full tuition cost, no matter what it is. But since there was a discount granted for the fall of 10%, if a student has received a combination of need or merit aid that exceeds the current tuition rate, we will have to reduce it to the current tuition rate. So that's the first piece. The next piece that I need to address is if individuals are receiving scholarships from outside of the university, external scholarships from other sources, in which the combination of the institutional grant or institutional scholarship that you've received, AU-based scholarship, and that outside scholarship exceeds the current tuition amount, we will have to make that reduction as well. Those are the two cases in which we would have to make reductions to either institutional funding that you've received. So, and then I think I need to make sure that our students and families know, once again, there are lots of questions that are specific to your family circumstances. We understand, we know that this pandemic has caused our students and families to experience hardships. We're here. As President Burwell has indicated in her opening remarks, we understand and as an institution stand ready to assist. Please note though that you must reach out to our office and that there's still rules that govern that entire process. And so we will work very closely with you, and if possible, try to provide you with assistance so that you will not have to worry about the affordability of an American university education. So having said that, I am going to pass it back to Fanta to talk about the other aspects.
Karyn, can you please move to the next slide, please? A couple of things. One is, I know there's lots of questions for those who will be in the district area about testing. We will be making testing available to students who are in the DC region, and it will be conducted on AU campus through our health center. The health center will be open to students. We do not have the capacity to provide quarantine support. Our student health center is an outpatient center. It is not an infirmary. And based on the guidelines from the district, students will be able to do quarantine within the residence that they're in. And so this is how we will be able to proceed, and our student health center will be able to kind of provide follow-up as needed. This is where we are in terms of the student health center. And a reminder that, again, through the student health center, we will not be able to discuss a student care without permission from the student. And so we will be working directly with students around those specific aspects of care. Wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. The question has come up about AU health insurance. Jonnel has already covered that, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that in terms of, but it is also the case that we've heard from some families about their interest in enrolling in our AU health insurance plan, and that is certainly available to you, and you can go ahead and sign up for the plan, and then it'll be reflected in the billing as accordingly. Karyn, next slide, please. There is actually this evening a webinar at 6 on students who are in leased apartments and what might be some of the options that are available to you. And so we have been sending information out about that specific webinar that is this evening at 6 p.m. and then at 5 p.m. at 6 p.m. And then there's also resource information that is on the off-campus housing website. Karyn, next slide. We will be offering emergency housing for students in exceptional circumstances. And these would be students, for example, who may be housing insecure, or students who are, for example, our international students, where it would be difficult to be able to kind of return home, given some of the travel difficulties and everything. So we will be having a very limited number of emergency housing, and folks can apply by emailing emergencyhousing20@american.edu, and a committee will evaluate their applications accordingly and get back to them as soon as possible. Important to remember that our residential facilities will not be operational, and our faculty and staff will be also working remotely, and so there's limited food services that will be available on campus during that period of time. Karyn, next. What happens if packages were already shipped? If they were already shipped, all received items on campus will be returned to the center in the coming few weeks. If you've shipped directly to Amazon, for example, to Amazon, we ask that you please work to cancel your order in advance with them. And if you have not yet shipped, we are asking that you please refrain from shipping at this time. And if you've been working with the UPS store because you were here as a returning student in the spring 2020, we're encouraging you to contact the UPS store directly to explore the options for storage or shipping. Next. What can parents and family do to help support students this fall? There are lots of ways that I think as family members you can help support your students. I've always said that part of our work with families is one of partnerships. And so the ways we will be having ongoing webinars with families, as you heard from my colleague Jessica Waters, that we're having a students kind of a student success summit on online and how we support students with online learning. Similarly, we feel like families will need equal support with how to support their students with online learning and what are the things that they should be considering. So we'll be having a series of webinars to help support parents along the way, and so stay tuned to those. Also, all the webinars that we've hosted, we record those webinars and we'll be making those available on the website that is the Office of Campus Life website. So stay tuned for that as well. We will be having a webinar specifically to discuss more extensively the academic component. Jessica has already touched on a lot of those as well, but you will be receiving an email about more discussions around the academic work. And as well, you will be receiving information from us about how we plan to help create communities in different parts of the country as well. But for families, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email auparent@american.edu. Karyn, Cassella, and the rest of the team are readily available to answer your questions as they come up. And know that if we didn't answer all of your questions today, we are taking those questions back and we'll be coming back with answers. And we continue to put answers on the frequently asked section of the website on COVID-19. And so we ask you to continue to take a look at that as we continue to refresh that website with more information as well. What is the plan for spring 2021? That's the question everybody has been asking. We're trying to catch our breath to kind of just get right into and jump right into fall 2020. But we know that this is something, questions on everyone's mind. What's the plan for 2021? I think you heard from President Burwell and all of us. This was not the plan. Our plan was really to kind of welcome everybody back for our returning students who we've missed seeing on campus, on the quad, and in other places, and for our incoming students to welcome you to the American University family. We will be making decisions about the spring plan as soon as we start our fall semester. We know that families and students are eager to learn more about that. And of course, if the conditions allow, our goal is to have everyone be able to come back to DC. But again, we're going to continue to monitor the situation, but rest assured that we know that this is important to all of you, and we'll make decisions about that in due time. Karyn, anything else? Again, for more questions, please don't hesitate to continue to submit your questions. We will do everything we can to get back to you with answers and to continue to populate the frequently asked questions. To all of our families, we can't thank you enough. We know that these are really challenging times. For our returning students, we know how much, not being on campus in DC is certainly a change. For our new students, we know you've been eager to kind of come and find your new home. We look forward to remaining in touch with you throughout this fall semester. We wish everyone well. Please be well, please be safe. And again, thank you for making time, and we look forward to continuing our engagement with you. Take care of yourselves, and thanks again. And to my colleagues, thank you for making the time to be with us this afternoon.